The Highgate Vampire is one of the most mysterious and enduring tales in British paranormal folklore. Emerging in the late 1960s and early 1970s, this legend captivated the imaginations of Londoners and paranormal enthusiasts worldwide. It revolves around sightings of a tall, dark figure believed to be a vampire haunting Highgate Cemetery, a historic and atmospheric resting place in North London. The Highgate Vampire story involves reports of mysterious occurrences, media frenzy, and public vampire hunts, eventually becoming a key part of British urban legend. Highgate Cemetery, with its Gothic tombs, overgrown pathways, and eerie silence, provided the perfect backdrop for a supernatural tale. The vampire saga drew together elements of folklore, modern media sensationalism, and public fascination with the occult, evolving into one of the most intriguing paranormal stories of the 20th century. Highgate Cemetery, a Gothic landmark. Before diving into the vampire legend, it's important to understand the setting. Highgate Cemetery. Opened in 1839, the cemetery was part of the Magnificent Seven, a group of large cemeteries established around London to cope with the city's growing population. Highgate quickly became the final resting place for many prominent Victorians, including authors, politicians, and intellectuals. Karl Marx is one of the most famous individuals interred there. With its sprawling design, elaborate mausoleums, and overgrown vegetation, Highgate Cemetery became a symbol of Victorian architecture and fascination with death. Over time, neglect and disrepair left parts of the cemetery abandoned, adding to its eerie and haunted atmosphere. It was this setting that laid the groundwork for the vampire story that would unfold. The emergence of the vampire legend. The legend of the Highgate Vampire took shape in the late 1960s. Reports of strange phenomena at the cemetery began circulating after a group of local residents claimed to have witnessed unusual figures, flickering lights, and other paranormal activity. Some described seeing a tall, dark figure with a menacing presence moving among the tombstones. This figure was said to have glowing red eyes and emitted an overwhelming sense of dread. Others claimed to have seen shadowy apparitions, felt cold gusts of air, or heard ghostly whispers while visiting the cemetery at night. The reports gained traction in 1969 when David Farrant, a local man with an interest in the occult, wrote a letter to the Hampstead and Highgate Express, or Ham and High, a local newspaper, describing his experiences in the cemetery. Farrant claimed he had encountered a supernatural entity while walking through Highgate one night and asked if others had experienced similar events. This letter sparked widespread interest and prompted readers to come forward with their own accounts of strange happenings. Around the same time, another figure, Sean Manchester, entered the scene. Manchester, a self-proclaimed vampire hunter and occultist, publicly declared that the entity haunting Highgate Cemetery was not a ghost but a vampire, an undead creature preying on the living. According to Manchester, the vampire was a centuries-old figure from Eastern Europe, brought to England in the 18th century and buried in Highgate. Over time, it had allegedly been reawakened through occult practices, and now stalked the cemetery, spreading fear and misfortune. Media frenzy and public vampire hunts. The involvement of Farrant and Manchester, combined with the growing media attention, fueled public fascination with the Highgate Vampire. Articles, interviews, and television segments focused on the strange occurrences at the cemetery, with both men becoming central figures in the narrative. The local press, particularly Ham and High, continued to report on the escalating situation, portraying the vampire legend as both a genuine concern and a source of sensational entertainment. By 1970, the situation reached a fever pitch. Both Farrant and Manchester claimed to have conducted investigations inside the cemetery, with each one asserting their own version of events. Manchester's vampire theory gained traction, and he publicly announced his plan to track down and destroy the Highgate Vampire by performing an exorcism and traditional vampire-slaying rituals, including driving a stake through its heart. On Friday, March 13, 1970, a large group of people descended on Highgate Cemetery after Ham and High published an article reporting Manchester's plans for a vampire hunt. Dozens of onlookers and self-appointed vampire hunters stormed the cemetery with crosses, stakes, and garlic, hoping to catch a glimpse of the supernatural figure. The scene resembled something out of a gothic novel, with eager crowds searching through the tombs and crypts for signs of the vampire. Although no definitive evidence of a vampire was found, the event solidified the story in the public consciousness. Rivalry between Farrant and Manchester. A major aspect of the Highgate Vampire saga was the growing rivalry between David Farrant and Sean Manchester. Though both men claimed to have paranormal expertise, their approaches and beliefs diverged sharply. Farrant, an occult enthusiast, leaned toward spiritual and psychic explanations, suggesting that the entity might be a ghost or supernatural force. He also explored the idea that the vampire myth could be a manifestation of the cemetery's haunted atmosphere. Manchester, on the other hand, fully embraced the vampire theory. He described himself as a modern-day vampire hunter, with a dramatic flair for rituals, invoking imagery from Bram Stoker's Dracula and other vampire lore. Manchester also claimed to have knowledge of ancient vampire-slaying techniques and asserted that the Highgate Vampire had been a nobleman who practiced black magic in Romania before his undead state was awakened in London. The public feud between the two escalated, with each accusing the other of fabricating stories or engaging in reckless behavior. Manchester challenged Farrant to a magical duel, which never took place, while Farrant dismissed Manchester's vampire hunting claims as attention-seeking. Their rivalry, though often seen as a farcical aspect of the story, only added to the media circus surrounding the Highgate Vampire. Paranormal investigations and strange occurrences. While the media and public fascination with the Highgate Vampire peaked in the early 1970s, strange occurrences continued to be reported for years afterward. Both Farrant and Manchester claimed to have conducted further investigations in and around Highgate Cemetery. David Farrant, in particular, claimed that he had encountered other supernatural entities in the cemetery, such as shadowy figures, spectral faces, and unexplained lights. He conducted several rituals and seances in an attempt to communicate with these spirits, though he remained ambiguous about whether the vampire itself was involved. Farrant's activities often resulted in legal trouble. He was arrested multiple times for trespassing in the cemetery, as well as for charges related to vandalism and desecration of graves. Sean Manchester, meanwhile, continued to insist that the vampire was real and that he had eventually tracked it down. In his 1985 book The Highgate Vampire, Manchester claimed that he had discovered the vampire's tomb in the cemetery and had performed an exorcism. According to Manchester, he and a group of assistants located a coffin in a crypt, opened it, and drove a stake through the heart of the vampire, which turned to dust. While there is no independent verification of this event, Manchester's story became part of the enduring legend. Over time, various paranormal investigators and enthusiasts visited Highgate Cemetery, searching for clues and attempting to capture evidence of the vampire. Ghost hunters reported unusual electromagnetic readings, temperature drops, and orbs of light in the cemetery, though none of these phenomena were conclusively linked to the vampire. Explanations for the Highgate Vampire. The Highgate Vampire legend can be interpreted in many ways, with explanations ranging from psychological to supernatural. Mass hysteria and urban legend. One of the most commonly accepted explanations for the Highgate Vampire is that it was a case of mass hysteria fueled by the media. The cemetery's spooky atmosphere, combined with the public's fascination with horror films and vampire mythology, likely contributed to the spread of the legend. The ongoing media coverage amplified people's beliefs in the vampire, leading to a snowball effect where more and more individuals reported strange sightings and experiences. Psychological projection. Some psychologists and sociologists have suggested that the vampire legend may be a form of psychological projection. Highgate Cemetery's eerie, decaying beauty, combined with its association with death and mourning, may have triggered latent fears and anxieties in visitors, causing them to imagine supernatural occurrences. The 1960s and 1970s were also a time of social and cultural upheaval in Britain, and the vampire legend may have provided an outlet for deeper, collective fears. Paranormal entity. For those who believe in the supernatural, a Highgate vampire may have been a genuine paranormal entity, though perhaps not a literal vampire. Some investigators have posited that the figure could be a ghost, demon, or other supernatural being, drawn to the cemetery's rich history of death and mourning. Others suggest that occult practices conducted in or around the cemetery might have disturbed the spirit world, allowing a malevolent entity to manifest. Hoax or fabrication. Skeptics have long maintained that the Highgate vampire legend was a hoax, either concocted by Farrant, Manchester, or both, in an effort to gain attention and media exposure. While there is no definitive proof that the vampire was fabricated, critics point to the sensational nature of the claims, as well as the rivalry between the two men, as evidence that the story was exaggerated for personal or financial gain. Legacy and cultural impact. The legend of the Highgate vampire remains one of the most famous and enduring paranormal stories in Britain. Highgate Cemetery itself has become a site of fascination not only for tourists and history enthusiasts but also for those intrigued by the occult and paranormal. The cemetery's dark, gothic allure continues to attract visitors who hope to catch a glimpse of the mysterious figure that once haunted its grounds. The tale of the Highgate vampire has inspired numerous books, documentaries, and even fictionalized accounts. It has also become a touchstone for discussions about urban legends, mass hysteria, and the power of folklore in modern times. For David Farrant and Sean Manchester, the Highgate vampire saga defined much of their lives. Though both men continued to pursue their interests in the paranormal, their rivalry in the vampire story remained their most infamous claims to fame. Farrant passed away in 2019, and Manchester has largely retreated from public life, but their roles in the Highgate vampire story ensure that their names remain linked to one of Britain's most enduring supernatural legends. The Highgate vampire is a story that blends gothic horror, urban legend, and public fascination with the paranormal. Whether seen as a genuine supernatural phenomenon, a psychological projection, or a case of mass hysteria, the legend has left an indelible mark on British folklore. Highgate Cemetery, with its rich history and haunting atmosphere, remains a symbol of the unknown, where fact and fiction continue to blur in the shadowy corners of the tombstones.